Hi, my name is Samuel, and I want to share with you the story of how I struggled with English and why I decided it was time to change my life. You see, for as long as I can remember, I've always had big dreams. I imagined myself traveling the world, visiting places like London, Paris, and New York. I wanted to walk through famous cities, meet new people, and experience all the amazing things the world has to offer. But there was one big problem. My English was terrible. Growing up, English wasn't something we used much in my hometown. Sure, I learned the basics in school, but it was never enough. Whenever I tried to watch an English movie, I felt lost. The words flew by so fast that I could barely understand anything. Listening to English songs wasn't any better. I could catch a few words, but the rest just sounded like noise. And speaking? Well, that was the hardest part. I would practice in my head, thinking I was ready, but when the time came to speak, the words would come out all wrong. I'd get nervous, and everything I had learned seemed to vanish. This struggle with English wasn't just about missing out on my dream to travel. It affected my everyday life, too. I work as a technician in a factory, and while I'm good at what I do, I've seen how much more is possible if you know English. Some of my co-workers, who could speak even a little English, were getting more responsibilities, better jobs, and even promotions. They were earning more money and building a future that I could only dream about. I wanted that too. I wanted to provide for my family, to advance in my career, and to feel like I was achieving something great. But every time I thought about learning English, it felt like an impossible task. The grammar rules, the pronunciation, the vocabulary, it all seemed so overwhelming. I can't tell you how many times I thought about giving up, but deep down, I knew I couldn't let this challenge define me. I couldn't let it stop me from reaching my dreams. So one day, I decided that enough was enough. I was going to learn English, no matter how hard it was, no matter how long it took. This is the story of how I started that journey, the challenges I faced, and how I finally began to conquer the language that once held me back. There was a moment in my life when everything changed, a moment when I realized that if I didn't take control of my future, I would always be stuck where I was, watching opportunities pass me by. It happened one afternoon at work. I was in the break room, sipping on a cup of coffee, when I overheard a conversation between two of my colleagues. They were talking about a new project that our company had just taken on, a project that involved working with clients from the United States. The project sounded exciting, full of new challenges and opportunities to learn, and I could tell that the management was looking for people to step up and take leadership roles. But as I listened to my colleagues talk, I realized something. They were speaking in English. They were discussing the details of the project, going over technical terms and business strategies, all in a language that I could barely understand. I sat there feeling like an outsider, unable to join the conversation, unable to even grasp what they were saying. That feeling of being left out, of being on the sidelines while others moved forward, hit me hard. I knew right then that if I didn't do something, this would be my life, always on the outside looking in, watching others seize opportunities that I couldn't reach. When I got home that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I thought about my dreams of traveling, of having a better job, of being able to communicate with people from different parts of the world. I thought about my family and how much I wanted to provide them with a better life. But most of all, I thought about how I had been holding myself back because of my fear of learning English. That night, as I sat in my small living room, I made a decision that would change my life. I decided that I was going to learn English, really learn it this time. I wasn't going to half-heartedly go through the motions like I had in the past. I wasn't going to let fear or frustration stop me. I was going to take this seriously, no matter how difficult it was or how long it took. I was tired of feeling like I was stuck in one place, and I knew that learning English was the key to unlocking the future I wanted. I started by setting clear goals for myself. I told myself that I would dedicate at least an hour every day to studying English. I didn't care if I was tired after work or if there were other things I wanted to do. I made a promise to myself that I would stick to this plan no matter what. My goal wasn't just to learn enough English to get by. I wanted to be fluent. I wanted to be able to hold a conversation without struggling to find the right words. I wanted to be able to read books, watch movies, and listen to music in English and actually understand what was being said. I wanted to be confident in my ability to communicate in a language that opened doors to the world. But it wasn't just about the language itself. Learning English became a symbol for me of growth, of progress, of overcoming the barriers that had held me back for so long. I knew that if I could conquer this challenge, I could take on anything. I could pursue the career I wanted, travel to the places I had always dreamed of, and most importantly, I could show my family that no obstacle was too big to overcome. So, with that decision made, I took my first step on a journey that would test me in ways I had never imagined. But I was ready. I was motivated by the thought of what my life could be if I succeeded, and that motivation gave me the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. This was the beginning of my journey to mastering English, and I was determined to see it through to the end. When I decided to learn English, I knew that I had to start from the very beginning. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was determined to build a strong foundation, even if it meant going back to the basics. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by notebooks, flashcards, and a few old textbooks that I had dug out from my school days. I felt like a student again, except this time I wasn't learning because I had to. I was learning because I wanted to. I began with the simplest words and phrases, things that I thought would help me get through everyday conversations. Words like hello, goodbye, please, and thank you. I practiced them over and over, saying them out loud, trying to get the pronunciation just right. It felt strange at first, hearing myself speak English, but I knew that repetition was key. I wrote down the words in a notebook, alongside their meanings, and carried it with me wherever I went. Every spare moment, whether I was waiting for the bus or standing in line at the grocery store, I would pull out that notebook and review the words. Slowly but surely, I started to remember them. Once I felt comfortable with basic vocabulary, I moved on to grammar. This was where things got tricky. English grammar, with all its rules and exceptions, seemed like a maze I couldn't find my way out of. I struggled with verb tenses, especially when it came to past and future tense. I would mix them up constantly, and it frustrated me to no end. But I didn't let that frustration stop me. I spent hours studying the rules, making notes, and doing exercises. I found free online resources, watched YouTube tutorials, and even joined an English learning app that offered interactive lessons. Each time I made a mistake, I would correct it and try again. One of the biggest challenges I faced was pronunciation. English has so many sounds that don't exist in my native language, and getting my mouth to produce those sounds was harder than I expected. I would spend hours in front of a mirror, practicing the way my lips and tongue moved to form the words. I remember getting frustrated when I couldn't pronounce certain sounds correctly, especially the th sound, which felt completely unnatural to me. But instead of giving up, I kept at it. I watched videos of native speakers, mimicking the way they spoke, and practiced until I got it right, or at least close enough that people could understand me. Another challenge was listening. I quickly realized that understanding spoken English was just as important as speaking it. I started watching English language TV shows and movies with subtitles, pausing every few minutes to repeat what the characters were saying. At first, it was overwhelming. The words blended together, and I struggled to keep up. But over time, my ears started to adjust. I could pick out familiar words and phrases, and gradually, I began to understand more and more of what I was hearing. Listening to music also helped. I would listen to English songs, look up the lyrics, and sing along, even if I didn't understand every word. It was a fun way to practice and helped me get used to the rhythm and flow of the language. One thing that kept me going during those early days was the small victories. I remember the first time I was able to order food in English without hesitation. It was a simple interaction, but it felt like a huge achievement. Or the time when I was able to read a short story in English and actually understand what it was about. Each of these moments gave me the confidence to keep pushing forward even when the lessons got tough. But perhaps the biggest challenge of all was staying motivated. There were days when I felt like I wasn't making any progress, days when I wanted to throw in the towel and go back to speaking only my native language. But I kept reminding myself why I was doing this, why it was so important for me to learn English. I thought about my dreams of traveling, of advancing in my career, and of being able to communicate with people from all over the world. I thought about the future I wanted to create for myself and my family, and that gave me the strength to keep going. Learning English wasn't just about memorizing words or mastering grammar. It was about changing the way I thought, the way I saw the world, and the way I interacted with others. It was about breaking down the walls that had kept me from achieving my goals and building a bridge to the life I wanted to live. And so, day by day, word by word, I continued to learn. I knew I had a long way to go, but I was no longer afraid of the journey. I was ready to take on whatever challenges came my way, knowing that each step forward, no matter how small, was bringing me closer to my goal. After months of studying English, I knew it was time to take my learning out of the textbooks and into the real world. It was one thing to memorize words and grammar rules, but using English in real-life situations, that was the true test. I started small, using English in everyday activities that I had once done in my native language. At first, it felt like stepping into unknown territory, but I knew that practical application was key to truly mastering the language. One of the first things I did was change the language settings on my phone to English. This might sound simple, but it was like throwing myself into an English-speaking world. Every notification, every app, and every setting was now in English. It forced me to think in the language and made it impossible to escape the practice. At first, it was challenging. I found myself second-guessing simple tasks, like sending a message or setting an alarm. But over time, I started getting used to it. I was no longer just translating words in my head. I was starting to think in English. Next, I began watching English movies and TV shows. I remember the first time I watched an entire movie in English without subtitles. It was a classic American film that I had seen before in my native language, so I knew the storyline, but watching it in English was like experiencing it for the first time. The characters spoke quickly, and I had to pause and rewind several times to catch what they were saying. But I didn't mind. Each time I understood a new phrase or caught a joke that would have gone over my head before, it felt like a small victory. I started to pick up on different accents, slang, and expressions that I had never encountered in my formal studies. It was a new level of learning, and it was exciting. Listening to English music became another part of my daily routine. I would play songs while cooking dinner, cleaning the house, or during my morning commute. At first, I just enjoyed the melodies, but soon I started paying attention to the lyrics. I'd look up the words to songs and sing along, even if I didn't understand everything at first. There was something about music that made learning English more enjoyable and less of a chore. The rhythm and repetition helped solidify words and phrases in my mind. Some of the lyrics were poetic and full of emotion, which made them stick with me. Before long, I found myself humming along to songs and even using some of the phrases I learned in my everyday conversations. Reading was another challenge I took on. I decided to start with children's books because the language was simpler and more accessible for my level. I remember picking up a short story that I had once read in my native language. The English version was different, but I was surprised at how much I could understand. It was slow going at first. I had to look up words constantly, and there were sentences that I had to read over and over to grasp their meaning. But I didn't give up. I set aside time every day to read, even if it was just a few pages. Gradually, I moved on to more complex books, short articles, and even news stories online. I started to see patterns in the language, the way sentences were structured, and how ideas were expressed. Reading not only improved my vocabulary, but also gave me insight into different cultures and perspectives. One of the most significant moments in my learning journey was when I started using English in conversations. It began with simple exchanges at work. Instead of sticking to my native language with colleagues, I started greeting them in English, asking basic questions, and engaging in small talk. At first, I felt awkward, and I could tell that my sentences weren't perfect. But I realized that it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was using the language, making it a part of my daily life. My colleagues were supportive and patient, correcting me gently and encouraging me to keep going. With each conversation, I gained more confidence. I stopped worrying about making mistakes and focused on communicating my thoughts. The more I spoke, the easier it became. English was no longer just a subject I studied. It was becoming a tool I could use to connect with others. One day, I had a breakthrough that made all the effort worthwhile. I was at a cafe, ordering a cup of coffee, when a tourist approached me asking for directions. They spoke English, and without thinking, I responded in English too. I gave them the directions they needed, and we exchanged a few pleasantries. It wasn't a long conversation, but it was completely natural. I didn't have to pause or search for words. It just flowed. As I watched the tourist walk away, I realized that I had just done something that would have been impossible for me a year ago. I had used English in a real-life situation, and it felt incredible. That moment reaffirmed everything I had been working toward. It showed me that learning a language isn't just about studying. It's about living the language, using it in everyday situations, and embracing the challenges that come with it. The practical application was where everything I had learned came together. It was where I could see my progress and where the language became a part of who I was. And so, I continued to immerse myself in English, not just as a student, but as someone who was ready to explore the world, one conversation at a time. After months of studying English on my own and practicing in everyday situations, I knew that if I wanted to take my skills to the next level, I needed more interaction with native speakers. But there was a problem. Where I lived, there weren't many opportunities to meet people who spoke English fluently. That's when I started looking online. I had heard about language exchange programs and apps where you could connect with people from around the world to practice different languages, but I had never really tried it myself. The idea of speaking with a stranger made me a bit nervous, but I knew it was something I needed to do if I wanted to improve. I spent some time researching different platforms until I found one that seemed like a good fit. It was a website where people from all over the world could sign up to practice languages together. I created a profile, listing English as the language I wanted to learn, and my native language as the one I could help others with. Within a few days, I received a message from someone named Mark, a native English speaker from Canada, who was learning my language. We exchanged a few messages back and forth, and soon we agreed to have our first conversation over a video call. I remember feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety as the call time approached. I had practiced speaking English on my own and with people I knew, but this was different. I was about to have a real conversation with a native speaker who I had never met before. What if I couldn't understand him? What if I made too many mistakes? These thoughts raced through my mind, but I reminded myself that this was exactly what I needed to push myself forward. The call started with a simple greeting, and to my relief, Mark was incredibly friendly and patient. He spoke slowly and clearly, making sure I could follow along. At first, we kept the conversation simple, talking about our interests, our reasons for learning each other's languages, and our daily lives. I was nervous, and my sentences were halting at times, but Mark didn't seem to mind. He would gently correct me when I made mistakes and encourage me when I got something right. I could feel my confidence growing with each sentence I spoke. One of the most valuable things about having a language partner was the immediate feedback. Whenever I stumbled over a word or used the wrong tense, Mark would point it out and explain why it was incorrect. He would then repeat the sentence the correct way, and I would try again. This kind of real-time correction was something I couldn't get from studying alone, and it made a huge difference in how quickly I learned. I started to notice patterns in the mistakes I was making and began to correct them on my own. Mark also helped me with pronunciation. There were certain sounds in English that I struggled with, especially the R sound, which is pronounced differently in my native language. Mark would demonstrate how to position my tongue and lips to make the correct sound, and we would practice it together. It was challenging, but having someone to guide me through it made it a lot easier. I began to notice improvements in how I spoke, and the words started to sound more natural coming out of my mouth. Our conversations quickly became a regular part of my routine. We would talk a few times a week, each time diving into different topics. Sometimes we would discuss cultural differences, which was fascinating because it gave me insight into not just the language, but also the mindset and way of life in English-speaking countries. Other times, we would practice more specific language skills, like role-playing different scenarios, ordering food at a restaurant, asking for directions, or even discussing more complex topics like current events. These exercises were incredibly helpful because they simulated real-life situations I might encounter, and they forced me to think quickly and use the language naturally. As the weeks went by, I noticed a significant improvement in both my speaking and listening skills. I became more comfortable with the flow of conversation, and I no longer had to pause as often to think about what I wanted to say. My sentences became smoother, and I started using more complex vocabulary and grammar structures. I could tell that Mark was also noticing my progress because he started to challenge me with more difficult conversations. We would discuss books, movies, and even philosophical ideas, all in English. These conversations stretched my abilities and pushed me to think more deeply in the language. Listening to Mark also improved my comprehension. In the beginning, I had to ask him to repeat things often because I couldn't catch everything he was saying. But over time, my ears became more attuned to the nuances of the English language, the intonation, the rhythm, and the subtle differences in pronunciation. I found myself understanding more and more of what he was saying without needing clarification. This boost in my listening skills gave me the confidence to engage in conversations with other English speakers as well, knowing that I could keep up and participate meaningfully. Our language exchange wasn't just about learning English for me, though. It also became a friendship. Over time, Mark and I got to know each other well, sharing stories about our families, our hobbies, and our dreams for the future. It was amazing to think that two people from opposite sides of the world who had never met in person could connect so deeply through the shared experience of learning a language. This connection made the process of learning English even more rewarding. In the end, finding a language partner like Mark was one of the best decisions I made in my English learning journey. It wasn't just about practicing the language, it was about building confidence, gaining real-world experience, and forming a bond that transcended cultural and linguistic barriers. I realized that learning a language isn't just about words and grammar. It's about communication, understanding, and connection. And through my partnership with Mark, I was able to achieve all of these things and more. English was no longer just a subject I studied. It had become a part of my life, a bridge to new experiences, and a means of connecting with people in ways I had never imagined. There was a time when I was still hesitant about my English. Even after practicing for months, I often found myself second-guessing my abilities. I would replay conversations in my head, wondering if I had said something wrong or if the other person had understood me. But then, something changed. I remember the exact moment when I realized that all my hard work was paying off and I could actually speak and understand English with confidence. It was a typical Friday evening, and I had decided to relax by watching a movie. I chose a film that I had wanted to see for a while, a popular English-language movie that everyone had been talking about. Normally, I would have turned on the subtitles to make sure I didn't miss anything, but this time, I decided to challenge myself. I turned off the subtitles and promised myself that I would just enjoy the movie, trusting that I would understand it. As the movie started, I braced myself for the usual struggle, trying to keep up with the dialogue, feeling lost when the characters spoke too fast, and missing key plot points because of words I didn't know. But to my surprise, none of that happened. As the scenes unfolded, I found myself following the story effortlessly. The words the characters were saying made sense to me. I could understand the jokes, the emotions, and the subtleties in their voices. I didn't need to pause or rewind to catch something I had missed. I was just watching the movie, like any other native English speaker would. It was such a simple moment, but it felt like a huge victory. I realized then that I had crossed a threshold. English was no longer a foreign language that I had to decipher piece by piece. It had become a language I could understand naturally, in real time. The sense of achievement was overwhelming. It wasn't just about understanding the movie. It was about proving to myself that I had truly learned the language, that all those hours of study, practice, and conversation had paid off. That same week, another moment solidified my confidence. I was chatting with a friend from my language exchange group, someone I had been practicing with for a few months. We were talking about our plans for the weekend, just casual conversation, and I noticed something amazing. I wasn't hesitating. The words were flowing out of my mouth without me having to think about them too much. I wasn't pausing to find the right word or worrying about making a mistake. The conversation felt natural, almost effortless. This was a big change for me. In the past, I would carefully plan out what I wanted to say in my head before I spoke, afraid of getting something wrong. But now, I was just speaking, responding to what my friend was saying, and actually enjoying the conversation. It felt good to see how far I had come, to know that I could engage in a conversation in English, just like I would in my native language. One of the most memorable moments for me was during a meeting at work. My company had started working with some international clients, and English was the language we used to communicate with them. I was asked to join a video conference with a few of these clients to discuss a new project. In the past, the thought of speaking English in a professional setting would have made me nervous, but this time, I felt ready. During the meeting, I participated in the discussion without any hesitation. I presented my ideas, answered questions, and even made a few jokes. And the best part? I understood everything that was being said, and I could tell that they understood me as well. When the meeting ended, I felt a sense of pride. Not only had I contributed to the conversation, but I had done so in English, a language that once felt so distant and challenging to me. These moments were turning points in my journey. They showed me that I was no longer just learning English, I was living it. I could watch movies, hold conversations, and participate in meetings with confidence. It wasn't just about the language itself. It was about the fact that I had pushed through the challenges, faced my fears, and come out the other side stronger and more capable. But it wasn't just about these individual achievements. Gaining confidence in English also opened up new opportunities for me. I started to seek out more situations where I could use the language, whether it was joining an English-speaking club, attending webinars, or simply chatting with English-speaking friends. The more I used English, the more confident I became, and the more I realized that I had truly mastered the language. Looking back, I'm proud of the journey I've taken. There were times when I doubted myself, times when I thought I would never be able to speak English fluently. But those moments of doubt were far outweighed by the moments of achievement, like understanding a movie without subtitles or having a conversation without hesitation. These moments reminded me that learning a language is not just about memorizing words and rules. It's about gaining the confidence to use that language in real life, to connect with others, and to see the world in a new way. As I continue to use English in my daily life, I'm excited to see where this journey will take me next. Whether it's traveling to new places, meeting new people, or exploring new ideas, I know that English will be a key part of my future. And I'm grateful for the confidence that I've gained along the way. A confidence that comes not just from knowing a language, but from knowing that I can achieve anything I set my mind to. As I became more confident in my English skills, I realized that I wanted to give back and help others who were on the same journey I had been on. I remembered how challenging it was when I first started, how every new word felt like a mountain to climb, how I struggled to string together even the simplest sentences, and how the fear of making mistakes often held me back. I knew that there were countless others out there facing the same challenges, and I wanted to share my story with them. So I started reaching out to English learners in my community and online. I began by joining a few language learning forums and social media groups where people from all over the world were trying to improve their English. I introduced myself, sharing my story, and how I had gone from barely understanding a word to holding conversations and watching movies without subtitles. I talked about the ups and downs of my journey, the times when I felt like giving up, and the moments of triumph that kept me going. I also shared the tips and strategies that had worked for me. I told them about the importance of starting with the basics, of not rushing through the learning process, but instead taking the time to build a strong foundation. I emphasized the value of regular practice, explaining how even just a few minutes a day could make a big difference over time. And I encouraged them to find a language partner, someone they could practice speaking with regularly, because that had been one of the most effective ways for me to improve. But more than anything, I wanted to share the message that learning English, or any language, requires persistence. There were so many times when I felt stuck, when it seemed like I wasn't making any progress at all. But I learned that those were the moments when it was most important to keep going. Language learning is not a straight path. It's full of twists and turns, ups and downs. But if you keep at it, if you stay committed to your goal, you will get there. I started hosting online meetups where English learners could come together, practice speaking, and share their experiences. These meetups became a supportive community where people could ask questions, share resources, and encourage each other. Seeing others make progress, knowing that I was helping them along their journey, became one of the most rewarding parts of my own learning experience. Now, whenever I hear someone say that they're struggling with English, I tell them that I've been there too. I tell them about the times when I felt like I would never get it and how I pushed through those moments. I remind them that it's okay to make mistakes, that every mistake is a step closer to fluency, and I always end with this piece of advice: don't give up. The journey may be long, but it's worth it. If I can do it, so can you. Looking back on my journey from struggling with English to becoming fluent, I can't help but feel a deep sense of pride and accomplishment. It wasn't an easy path. There were many challenges, many moments of doubt. But each of those challenges taught me something valuable, and every moment of doubt was an opportunity to grow stronger and more determined. When I first started learning English, I did it because I knew it would open up new opportunities for me, whether in my career, my travels, or my personal life. But what I didn't realize was how much it would change me as a person. Learning a new language taught me patience, resilience, and the importance of setting goals and sticking to them. It taught me to embrace discomfort and to see mistakes not as failures, but as essential steps in the learning process. Today, I'm fluent in English, and it feels like I've gained a new way of seeing the world. I can connect with people from different cultures, explore new ideas, and access knowledge that was once out of reach. And perhaps most importantly, I've gained the confidence to take on new challenges, knowing that I can succeed if I stay committed and keep pushing forward. To anyone out there who is on their own English learning journey, I want to say this: I know it can be tough. I know there will be times when you feel like giving up, when progress seems slow, and when the language feels overwhelming. But remember, every step you take brings you closer to your goal. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, and don't be discouraged by setbacks. They're all part of the process. Keep practicing, keep learning, and keep believing in yourself. If you stay persistent, if you keep working at it every day, you will get there. And when you do, you'll look back on this journey and see how far you've come. You'll realize that all the hard work, all the effort was worth it. So, keep going. Your future self will thank you for it.